Okay, what a fantastic opportunity to celebrate the incredible work of the Center for Studies in Poverty and Social Citizenship. Welcome to the third and final part of our celebration as we reflect on and honor the 75th anniversary of the School of Social Work. As part of this rich history, we celebrate the development and growth of our PhD program, which welcomed its first cohort in 2012. This afternoon, we look ahead to the bright future by spotlighting the research of 3 of our current PhD candidates. Their research spans a wide range of important topics and innovative methodologies, showcasing our programs and students' commitment to tackling pressing social issues and methodologies. I'm Catherine Ocuto, an assistant professor with the School of Social Work and a proud graduate of our PhD program. It's an honor to introduce our panelists, each of whom will share a snapshot of their PhD research. They'll each have about 10 minutes, and then you'll all have an opportunity to ask them some questions, and we'll try not to get you out too late. We apologize for starting a few minutes late. We prioritize getting you cake. So we're going to start with Kendall. Kendall David studies, teaches, and writes about poverty, disability justice, and critical social work. As a member of the Basic Income Youth Collective, Kendall organizes with young people to fight for better income support policies. Kendall's PhD research examines disparities in Ontario's disability support program for people living in residential care institutions like group homes and long-term care. Thank you, Kendall.
Okay. Thank you very much, Catherine, for introducing me. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Congratulations to the School of Social Work on your 75th anniversary and to the Center for your 50th anniversary. I'm delighted to be here to celebrate with all of you and to share a bit about my work. So as Catherine mentioned, my dissertation research is about social assistance, the Ontario Disability Support Program, and how that works for disabled people who are living in institutions. So we know that there is a significant correlation between disability and poverty here in Canada, and that disabled people rely more heavily on government transfers and social assistance to make up for their income compared to poor people without disabilities. And so, as also Natalie mentioned in her presentation earlier, monitoring the rates of social assistance is really important because they chronically are always set below the poverty line, and it's important to keep an eye on how much people are able to receive and the impact that that has on their lives. So all of the research that we have about disability and poverty in Canada from the last 30 years at a federal level excludes people who are living in institutions. So the federal government used to collect data in institutions but stopped doing that in 1991. So everything we know about disability, poverty in a contemporary context is missing a really important piece of the picture. And so I wanted to start to chip away a little bit at that enormous gap to study, again, just within Ontario, how folks who are institutionalized are interacting with the Ontario Disability Support Program. So here in Ontario, if you're a single person in Ontario who is renting or owning their primary residence, the basic monthly amount that you are eligible to get from ODSP is just over $1,300 a month. But again, people who are living in institutions, so this includes folks living in long-term care, in group homes for people with developmental disabilities and psychiatric facilities, domiciliary hostels, boarding homes, they're all excluded from accessing the standard rate of ODSP. And instead, they get boarding rates or institutional rates. So boarders get a lump sum for basic needs and shelter, and when they live in boarding homes specifically designated for disabled people, that full amount usually goes straight to their landlord, and they can retain a $71 personal allowance per month. And if they're living in a usually public institution, then they are eligible just for $149 a month. Boarders and institutionalized people make up about 18% of the ODSP caseload for about 65,000 people here in Ontario. And this $149 is supposed to cover all of your personal expenses beyond food and shelter. So clothing, footwear, transportation, cell phone, the whole 9 yards. And it's not enough money to pay for the basic things that people need. So that means that usually they go without. So my research is seeking again to kind of pick away at this problem and to make sense of how institutionalization is represented within ODSP's core policy texts, what the ideological implications of those are. So, what does it mean that different groups of disabled people are entitled to different levels of social assistance to cover their basic needs? And then what do the people who are actually impacted by this policy, what do their experiences tell us about how ableism is manifested through this program? So, critical disability studies is the core foundation, the theoretical foundation of my project, which I won't get into because it's too much to talk about in 10 minutes, but that's the core. And I've done a critical discourse historical analysis. That's my methodology, which blends sociological and linguistic analysis. And I have two kind of core sets of data in my research. So I have this multi-phased research. So the first set of data was the policy texts that regulate ODSP. And I also looked at all of the 131 historical amendments, so the different versions of ODSP that we've had since the program started in 1998, to see how institutional allowances have changed over time. And then I did interviews as well. So I so far have talked to 19 people, so 16 ODSP recipients and 3 folks who work in institutional care homes. So on the recipient side, I've talked to 7 folks living in domiciliary hostels, which are mostly privatized boarding homes. And for my study, these are usually places that have at least 75 residents living, usually 2 adults in a shared room. And more than 75 people in each of the hostels that I've visited. I talked to 3 folks living in psychiatric institutions, 2 in long-term care, 1 in a group home, and 3 who are currently renting in the community but have recent experience with ODSP while living in transitional housing after fleeing domestic violence, dom hostel, and a homeless shelter. So I'll share just a little bit. I'm still doing my analysis, but I'll share just a little bit of what I've found so far from the policy text first, and then I'll talk a bit about the interviews. So the first is that the ODSP policies are a nightmare to make sense of. They use really inconsistent and convoluted legal terminology to describe really concrete, important issues that are relevant to recipients' lives. Everyone I talked to, for the most part, found that the policies were confusing and had a really poor understanding of how they worked and how to navigate them in their own interests. Oops. The second thing that I found is that despite being central to the logic of the program, institutionalization is not named anywhere in the policy texts. So again, we have these institutional allowance rates. It's a core component of how the policy is organized, but the word institution doesn't show up. So this has only been the case since 2012. The provincial government removed all mentions of institutionalization, replaced them with euphemisms like specialized care residence or other cases, and made no other substantive changes. So the institutions that were called institutions in 2011 are now not called institutions anymore. The same allowance rates apply, the same program, it stayed the same, but we stopped calling them institutions. And the third preliminary theme here is that the policy texts justify these abysmally low allowance rates by relying on this faulty logic that people's shelter and food needs are taken care of by institutional providers. And something that we're seeing, and that, again, Natalie mentioned in her talk earlier, is that these providers for, again, disabled-only housing facilities are increasingly privatized and increasingly run for profit. So the level of care is not so great. Okay. So I'll share a little bit, too, then, about what I've heard from, I'm going to focus on recipients for the sake of time. So this again, this kind of core policy logic, this assumption that people's food and shelter needs are already taken care of, contrasts recipients' experiences. So I heard a lot that people use a pretty significant portion of their very limited allowance to buy food to replace or supplement institutional meals. So they have really limited choice, poor quality, and insufficient quantity of food. And it's usually provided on a really strict schedule. So, if breakfast is at 7 o'clock, it's there for 25 minutes. And if you're not up at 7, then there's no breakfast for the day. So this quote here is from Cole. He is 26, an Indigenous person has been living in a psychiatric facility on and off for the last 2 years. He says, they say we don't need to buy groceries, but we really do. The food sucks here. You get a plate of chicken, and the plate is half full of water. It's all just cheap, the cheapest food you can get. I've been in and out of jails and penitentiaries for years, and you eat better in there than you do here. Another quote from a person who, from another person about food. So Michaela is 24. She's a Black woman in her mid-20s. Who's 24, who's living in a long-term care home. So she says, when I can put a little money aside, I'm ending up paying for food when technically food is covered. It's not ethnically inclusive. The food is poison, in my opinion, and I can't afford to starve. I feel like I'm treated like less of a human being, like they're doing us a favor. So whatever they throw at you, you should just take it. So these quotes highlight that, again, the assumption that people's basic food and shelter needs are taken care of by the institutions they live in is not the reality for recipients. And they, again, are ending up spending these abysmally low allowance rates to cover needs that should otherwise be covered. And then one of the other things that folks shared about one of the other themes that I heard is that the really deep poverty that people are experiencing, combined with the inherently isolating nature of the institutions that they live in, has severed their connections to the world beyond in really material ways. So folks, most of the people I talked to didn't have their own personal cell phone or internet access, and struggled to afford transportation costs, including when they were living in institutions like public institutions that were supposed to offer them a bus pass for free to get in and out of the facility. So this is from Nathan, who's 25 and living in a domiciliary hostel with his mom. He says, I haven't seen my brother in 6 months. I have no phone to keep in touch and haven't had a phone in so long, I can't afford one. So this also impacted people's ability to get in touch with their caseworkers, playing a lot of phone tag from payphones or like common residence landlines to get in touch with ODSP caseworkers who they have a really hard time getting in touch with to get further benefits. So trying to end on a more practical note, what are some things that we could do to make this program better? First would be to, I put triple the allowance rates, but as I was brushing my teeth this morning thinking about my notes, $600 a month would actually be quadrupling the allowance rates. So that would support people to afford the basic necessities that they currently are just living without. They just can't afford them at all. We could also index the payments and include them so in the current government's measures to index ODSP payments so that they go up annually with inflation. These are some of the only ODSP payments that were excluded from that measure. So we could, once they're increased, also index them so that folks are able to keep up with rising cost of living. And we could regulate private institutions or close them and increase public access to home health care, affordable housing instead. These private institutions in particular are real hotbeds for exploitation and neglect and really worthy of further scrutiny. Okay, and then again, really practically, there's Raise the Rates is a campaign to double all the social assistance rates in Ontario, including institutional allowances. They have a petition, an ongoing campaign that you could check out and sign. And you could also write to your MPP and urge them to increase and index the allowance rates. I had intended to have postcards ready to go, but the printer did not have them in time. But be happy to share once I've got them, a pre-filled out postcard that you can send to Minister Parsa, who is the Minister for Social Services right now. Okay, that is all. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Kendall. That was wonderful. Next, we're going to have Ruxi Gheorghe. Ruxi's research and teaching spans both policy and clinical social work. Her current research is concerned with articulations of toxic masculinity, countertransference, and empathy in direct therapeutic practice. She's particularly interested in researching how the social work field intersects with the incel community and adjacent communities in the manosphere. So we'll have Ruxi come up. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. And hello, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Ruxi, and I'll be presenting on my doctoral research titled Conceptualizing Gender-Based Countertransference, a simulation-based study on women social workers and incel clients, which is just a very long way of saying, what's it like for women working with incel clients? My committee is made up of Doctors Kenta Asakura and Sarah Todd, my co-supervisors, as well as my lovely external who's here today, Dr. David Yuzba Clement. So you've probably heard of the word incel before, but if you haven't, it essentially stands for somebody who is involuntarily celibate, meaning somebody who has difficulty with dating, sex, and romance. Now, the incel community, as we know it today, is typically made up of young heterosexual men, largely congregating in online spaces. So forums, websites, chat rooms, that sort of thing. And they have highly harmful beliefs. They have a sense of entitlement over women and their bodies, and there's a lot of blame and anger towards women, but also feminism for their perceived lack of success with dating. They are sometimes violent against themselves, which looks like engaging in self-harm and sometimes suicide. They're also sometimes violent against others, so this can look like gender-based violence or homicide. But all in all, most of them are not actively physically violent, though of course there have been many violent instances to date, and probably you've heard of the Toronto van attack back in 2018 being just one example of that. What I find so interesting though about this community is that it actually has its roots at Carleton University right here. So back in the 90s, there was a queer student named Alana who herself was having trouble with dating. And so she hand-coded the website that you see here, Alana's Involuntary Celibacy Project. And it was a supportive forum based in mutual aid and advice giving to support other people, students who are having trouble dating, queer or not queer. But over time, it really lost its supportive roots and became the misogynistic community that we know of today. So let's flash forward to the intersection of incels and mental health. Compared to the general population, incels report significantly higher rates of mental health challenges and neurodivergence. And they also report similar high experiences of having histories of bullying and social exclusion. Over half of incels, though, seek counseling and therapeutic services on their own, and yet almost all of them terminate. So they drop out of therapy, they stop receiving those services, and they report that therapy is actually pretty unhelpful to them. It won't help fix their ugliness, quote unquote. And actually, a lot of people actually report saying that they felt judged or blamed by the social workers or the therapists themselves. And so I wondered, especially in such a feminized field where women identifying clinicians make up the majority of clinicians, what is it like then? What happens in that clinical space? What happens if you encounter an incel client? Do topics of sexism come up? And if so, do you become dysregulated? How do you wade through those feelings? So this brings me to the second puzzle piece of my research, countertransference. So the contemporary definition of countertransference, it essentially refers to the thoughts, the reactions, the feelings, and the attitudes that the clinician experiences in response to a client, which of course looks and feels like different things to different people. But it is typically triggered by something in the client. So something that the client says or does, something about the way the client presents or their context. And it also largely relates to something within the clinician themselves too, their own histories, their own experiences, their own values, their own upbringing. If you take a look at the countertransference literature, it talks about the importance of identifying countertransference, so being aware of one's own countertransference triggers, and then also managing that. And the literature talks about how when it goes unmanaged, or when clinicians don't actually have an idea of it actually happening, it can cause quite a bit of harm to clients. And clinicians talk about how they end up blaming clients, or they end up rejecting or punishing the client, or being overly critical of the client. So here's my research project. The purpose of my doctoral work then is to identify and describe the gendered experience of countertransference of women social workers supporting incel clients. And I have two main research questions. Very simply, one asks, how do women experience that countertransference? And then second, how do they then manage it? So this here is an overview of my research methods, and I'd like to draw your attention to the middle section if you're able to see it. It's the data collection methods piece. So I'll walk you through how I did that. So to answer my research questions, I ended up simulating an initial clinical encounter with an incel client. And I did this by hiring and training an actor to play a typical incel client based on a vignette that I developed in collaboration and informed by many other things, which I'll be speaking to soon. I then invited 20 women identifying social workers to interact with this incel client for 30 minutes. Following that, they engaged in about an hour and a half with myself to answer some reflective interview questions. Now, countertransference in the literature is shown to, of course, be understudied, but when it is studied, it is shown to actually be most activated in that initial first phase of counseling, which is why using simulation to almost mimic that immediate first 30 minutes of a counseling session is really fitting, actually, for countertransference research. I'm currently also, like Kendall, halfway about through my data analysis, so I'll be using the rest of my time here to talk about where I'm at and some of the preliminary findings of my research. But first, meet Zach. Who you see here is the actor that I hired and trained to play Zach, the incel client. So Zach presents as a young man who's requesting clinical services because of his frustration and his inability to get a girlfriend. He also presents with quite a lot of anger towards the world and just a general sense that his life is just not going anywhere. To create this client vignette, I followed the simulated client creation guidelines from Kenta Asakura's work, also pulling on Marian Bogo's work, but it was informed by a couple of other pieces as well, including my own research that I've done on the incel community, which I've published on a couple of times, but also my own clinical experience working with ideologically radicalized clients. And probably most importantly, community consultation that I did with 3 practitioners who work with incel clients, as well as 3 former incels. And I had them consult on this client vignette, this case study of Zach, and provide input to see whether it reflects what they've lived through and what they've seen. So that all informed who Zach is. What you see here is the poster that I used to recruit 20 women identifying social workers across Canada. I won't go too deeply into the demographics because I really want to talk about the preliminary findings that I've come across through. So here's what the women social workers are talking about. They're saying that working with incel clients is such a balancing act, and their experiences in that process are very gendered. When topics like sexism and misogyny come up in the clinical context, it's not just something theoretical or conceptual for them. For many of them, it was very felt and personal, close to home. For many of them, it could have been triggering, or it was triggering. This means, though, that it's actually very difficult to hold space and support somebody when you disagree with a client, or perhaps are even triggered by them. But what clinicians are saying is that it's also equally important to not act on those feelings of dysregulation, their own triggers. And if they have a sense or this need that they want to debate the client, debate their ideology or their beliefs because they disagree with it, they suggest do not do that, because not only does it pull away from psychosocial support goals, but it also could reinforce the client's beliefs and worldview and could push them even further away. So instead, they suggest centering the client despite their own dysregulation. And they did this by trying to empathize with the client, trying to contextualize the client. Why is the client saying these things? Looking towards their upbringing, thinking about the ways that the patriarchy harms us all, really. And they also spoke to the importance of understanding clients without validating their ideologies or their harmful beliefs. This all is easier said than done, and clients or clinicians described it as very exhausting work. They spoke to how this labor, this emotional labor, was gendered, and also that there's a risk of moral injury when you're doing this work, and when you're in spaces professionally that perhaps go against your own beliefs or your own values, and sometimes even your own safety. So they highlighted this heightened sense of awareness. You as a clinician must have an awareness of your own triggers and what could potentially come up. What is your threshold when working with these clients? And equally important, this need to have really strong ability to regulate themselves emotionally. When they do feel dysregulated or activated in those sessions with clients, how do they then ground themselves enough to center the client instead? So this is where I'm at, very preliminary, and my next steps for me are to continue data analysis, write up, and then hopefully defend. Thank you so much for being here, and to the School of Social Work for supporting me in my research. Congratulations on the anniversaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruxi. So as you can see, we have the best PhD candidates ever here. So last but not least, we have Margaret, whose slides I'll pull up for you. Margaret's research and practice focuses on enhancing autistic individual and community well-being. In her teaching, she's dedicated to fostering inclusive learning spaces that support diverse backgrounds and identities. As a neurodivergent scholar and practitioner, Margaret brings her lived experience to infuse a neuroinclusive perspective into her research, teaching, practice, and service. Her doctoral research examines practitioner perspectives on autistic adult mental health, and we're very excited to hear about it. So, Margaret's turn. There you go.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Ruxi and to Kendall for your lovely presentations. I don't think I can match the beauty of Ruxi's slides, but I will try to engage you all right now. So my name is Margaret Janse van Rensburg, and I am really grateful to be here today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. And as I talk today, I'll talk a lot about ableism. And I really want to recognize that ableism is really rooted within colonialism. And so it's important to make note of that today. Okay, lovely. So, my name is Margaret Janse van Rensburg, and I'm in my 5th year of my PhD, hopefully my last. I am a meso-level social worker, which means that I work primarily with communities and organizations. And I see myself as informed by critical pragmatism. So I see this as operating in a way through combining practical and scholarly knowledge while paying attention to power and really infusing community voice into my work. So this means being influenced by community in guiding my research priorities and making sure that the outcomes of my research are really important to members of the community. So I wasn't always a social worker. Before entering social work, I was fascinated by history. So you can see a picture of me on the slide doing archaeology. And as a neurodivergent person, I love the ability to be physical and be also in a mentally challenging profession. I also have lived experience as a service user and as a research participant, and this really brought me into my work. So on the screen, you can also see a picture of my brain. So this is from an MRI when I was a participant in an RTMS study. So my research is really dedicated to enhancing autistic individual and community well-being. And while I'm a non-autistic person, my lived experiences with eating disorders and neurodivergence have sparked my interest in enhancing and researching autistic adult mental health. So I came to Carleton in 2018 as a master's student, and I got involved with the Ottawa Adult Autism Initiative when I came here. So my dissertation research was really inspired by this community work with the Ottawa Adult Autism Initiative. They're a grassroots organization made up of autistic adults, parents of autistic adults, and service users. These community leaders work towards an Ottawa that is accessible and desired by autistic adults. I've had a relationship with them since 2019 when I acted as a researcher for them, and I provided a review of potential ways that the group could develop based on other successful organizations. And I was also part of their research on autistic adult needs in 2021, which was funded by an Ontario Trillium grant, and they developed a community snapshot of the autistic adult landscape in Ottawa. So one of the findings of this snapshot was that autistic adults, family members, professionals, and allies did not perceive autistic adult mental health in Ottawa as positive. So in 2022, I completed my qualifying exam where I explored the ethics of autism research. And from this, I really knew that my dissertation needed to create meaningful outcomes for the autistic adult community. To ensure this, I initiated a preliminary planning stage to develop my dissertation research. I reviewed the community's reports, had initial conversations with community members, and used this to shape a relevant research focus. With ethics clearance and consent from the Ottawa Adult Autism Initiative to partner in research, I collected data through participant observation by reviewing internal organizational documents. And during this stage, they shared their concerns about a loss of knowledge from retiring and burned out professionals who are doing good work in the community, as well as their concerns about limited knowledge sharing in Ottawa. And these insights directly shaped my dissertation to try and address some of these challenges. Autistic adult mental health has also been framed as a crisis, a paradox where autistic people have a high chance of developing mental health problems, but a low chance of receiving effective help. More broadly in Ontario, there were calls for autistic adult mental health and well-being to be better supported. While previous research has investigated barriers to accessing mental health treatment faced by autistic people and the reasons that practitioners may not work with autistic adults, no research had critically examined the systems that impact autistic adult mental health or how practitioners and professionals attempt to redress some of these issues in their practice. So my research draws on ecological systems theory. Many of you probably have heard of this. So ecological systems theory was used to organize practitioner and professional perspectives on autistic adult mental health. So in the center is the microsystem, the autistic adult. In the middle are interactions between autistic adults and other individuals, such as practitioners and professionals and organizations in the mezzosystem, and broader structures, including the economy, cultural values, political systems, social norms, traditions, ideology, and cultural beliefs, are in the macrosystem. So my dissertation sought to answer the research questions: what are the barriers to autistic adult mental health in Ottawa? And what strategies do practitioners and professionals use to overcome some of these barriers? So, because I have a great 4 minutes left, to be mindful of time, I really just want to talk today about one of the findings, which is ableism and stigma. So this was one of the main themes that was uncovered in my dissertation research as a barrier to autistic adult mental health in Ottawa. I refer to participants by pseudonyms. So ableism is the discrimination based on ability. It is a cultural phenomenon that can be conceptualized in the macrosystem. However, across all levels, ableism and stigma was noted by the interview participants as a pervasive issue that impacts autistic adult mental health by practitioners and professionals. In the macrosystem, the systemic issue of ableism undermines autistic adult trust and reinforces harmful stereotypes and hinders meaningful inclusion. Catherine noted that we are all working within ableist systems and that as a practitioner, it's our duty to try and work and change it. In the mezzosystem, with respect to services, ableism deters organizations and practitioners from developing programs and services that are inclusive for autistic adults. Jasmine reflected that many times when programming is being developed, neurodivergence is forgot about. And in the microsystem, on an individual level, participants noted that internalized ableism and self-stigma impact autistic adult mental health. For example, Francine noted that many of her autistic clients have to work through their own self-hatred and self-judgment that is rooted in systemic ableism. From the literature, we know that stigma impacts mental health access and support, as well as how it may negatively impact autistic individual and family member well-being. This highlights the need to address it across all systems levels. So practitioners and professionals overcame the barrier of ableism through advocacy and education, with Christine saying that when working with autistic people in a clinical setting, it's important to use a critical clinical approach, connecting the personal with political to reduce self-blame in their autistic clients. Other practitioners mentioned strategies in investing in community education and government-based advocacy. So to end today, I just want to note that, ableism and stigma don't only impact autistic adult mental health. They impact everybody. So I want to end today by challenging all of you to think about what you can do to address ableism in your future, whether you work in the macrosystem, mezzosystem, microsystem, or across systems levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Kendall, Ruxi, and Margaret. I know I certainly want to hear more and wish we had a lot more time, so thank you so much. I think you have fans out of all of us and supporters. So we have a few minutes for some questions, and then we will wrap up. So if anybody has a question, if you want to just raise your hand and Andrea will come find you.
I missed someone, point me
I think we've had a long day. Oh, Karen.
Okay, I have a question for all of you to answer. Excuse me. So sitting here as a social work educator, I'm hearing about the amazing research you are all doing, which is very cool. I'd be interested to know what you think at the education level we could be doing to prepare students to address some of the issues and what you've heard from your participants.
In whichever order works for you.
I don't mind going. So because countertransference is so central to my work, it's like what I look and feel and eat every single day. I really do bring it into the classroom. I try to have students reflect on things that dysregulate them. I think that we perhaps envision a certain client to be in a certain kind of way, and it's often not people that dysregulate us or that we disagree with. And so even just last class this week, I had my students do an exercise, reflect on what kind of clients dysregulate them and how might they do that work to muddle through their dysregulation. I really do think it's central to the way that we teach social work students, for sure.
Thanks, Ruxi. And great question, Karen. Margaret, Kendall, did you want to add anything?
Education, education, education. Like, just keep, and it doesn't end within your BSW, MSW, PhD, right? It's something that we continually have to keep on coming back to and learning more. And I think that this is something that like we learn really well as social workers, is how to do this critical self-reflection and reflecting on how can I improve in the future. And so this is something that I think comes out of my work, is we need more education and training in autism, but we also need to know that if I was educated 10 years ago, I wasn't saying autistic people, and now I say autistic people because it's in line with the communities that I work with. And I was actually trained to say person with autism, and there's a whole thing, and it's going to take longer than 8 minutes to tell you about it. But it's coming back to that education and remembering that it's a lifelong journey.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm biased because of the structural approach at Carleton, and I'm thinking about interactions that I have had with students, and what they're bringing to the classroom. Because I think that it's really important for social work students to understand that policies like the ins and outs of the ODSP legislation are going to have an impact on the work that they can do with clients, or on how clients are showing up with them, regardless of whether they're working as, a therapist or, in a community organization, or as an ODSP caseworker. Like the policy, the social policy landscape, like shapes our practice, of course. And I think but I think I see that already in the curriculum and in how we approach our work with students here, that, emphasizing that importance of the relevance of social policy for social work practice, even direct practice, and then equipping students with skills to do community organizing and political advocacy. And I hope students leave with skills and the knowledge that they can make an impact on political issues, even if their practice isn't from working within a policy context, right? There's lots of ways that people can and do make change happen in their communities and at a political level on the side of their desks. I think most of the people that I've interacted, most of the social workers I interact with in the work that I do are not doing, political work, but they have lots to say and an important voice in shaping policy, and that's something that a commitment that they have beyond their direct practice. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, David. We have a mic we can get to. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much to all of you. Question for Kendall and for Margaret. Your research is great. You're researching and working with vulnerable communities. How did the ethics process look like for you when you applied for ethics here at Carleton? Thank you.
Mine was easy breezy. I did not have a lot of institutional challenges with getting ethics clearance. But I also think that comes with knowledge and experience going through the ethics process, and a very supportive committee who helped me identify potential snags for getting through the process in a smooth way, working with disabled people. I'd say the major challenge has been not going through institutions for recruitment. And so, that has been a challenge, but is also an important ethical practice that people are coming to me, not because they're a caseworker or they're, Royal Ottawa worker told them that they should participate in my study. So yeah, it was pretty straightforward for me, actually.
Thank you. And Margaret?
I'll say that Carleton has a very good research ethics board, and as social worker, and I say that with a lot of bias because I worked with them for a very long time. And as social workers, we also have our social work code of ethics. So I think we bring this additional lens when we are applying for ethics about doing right by communities. And as long as that's well explained within our protocols, I think that that helps within the ethics process. I will say within my research, I didn't interview autistic people themselves. I had 2 ethics protocols. So one was for the community collaboration part, and then the second part was for the interviews with practitioners and professionals. And the practitioners and professionals, which is the main study, I wanted to recruit through the Algonquin College, for example, and through the school board, because a lot of autistic adults, when they reach 18, they kind of age out of autism services, and it's called like a cliff, right? There's 2 cliffs. There's the reaching adulthood, and then there's aging. And parents will keep their adult children in school as long as possible because there is nothing else. There's no other services, especially unless you are paying for privatized services. And even then, you can pay for maybe a day or 2 days a week. It's not enough, but you can keep somebody in high school until 21. And so I wanted to go through the school board. And so I had to apply for their additional ethics. They did not allow me to. They rejected my application because it doesn't have to do with enhancing outcomes for the school. And when I went through Algonquin College to try and recruit there, it was a similar process that by the time that I had put in the application, it was kind of like a timeline where I had kind of hit that recruitment end. So I did find those institutional hurdles. Even with Algonquin College, they did not accept my my Carleton ethics clearance.
So we could take one short question if somebody has a short one. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. So do we have a qualifier short question or? Pardon, Hugh? Is yours a big question? Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. But thank you so much to Kendall, Ruxi, and Margaret for sharing your research with us. Particularly as it can feel quite vulnerable when it's not yet totally complete. So thank you for sharing it with us. We're all absolutely hooked and cheering for you as you get across that finish line. Thank you so much for celebrating the center with us and its 50th celebration and the School of Social Work's 75th. We really appreciate your presence and support. So thank you so much, everybody, for being with us.